In the presentation that I presented, it might have seemed ambitious, my abstract, in envisaging a topic that exceeds a 20-minute presentation, and therefore I must make a meaningful and pragmatic selection of information in order to present you this vast topic. So I investigate the late antique religious transformation of the Western Balkans, that is the Western Illyricum at the time. You can see the map in the presentation, where Christianization of completely or almost completely Romanized culture was evident from the 3rd century AD onward. After the Great Persecution, and the legalization of Christianity that soon followed, we have a sudden outburst of both written and material evidence of this religious transition. However, we are speaking of the Roman frontier, and let's say one of the most unstable ones at the time, which had already experiencing another cultural transformation as a result of the increased infiltration of a new cultural element, the Germanic tribes. Thus, we have 3 parallel cultural processes: de-Romanization, Christianization, and barbarization. As we will show, the emerging cult of the saints in the Western Balkans from the 4th to 6th century will have a significant role in these processes, especially in terms of continuity and change between late Roman and later medieval forms of veneration, iconography, including loca sanctorum, hagiography, and relics. The cults of Irenaeus of Sirmium, Quattor Coronati, Demetrius of Thessaloniki, Anastasia of Rome, Quirinus of Siscia, Florus and Laurus, Hermilus and Stratonicus, Florian Lauriacus, Domnius of Salona, Anastasius of Salona, just to name the most prominent examples out of many, they all originated from Western Illyricum and the above-mentioned cultural milieu. The question I am posing in this research is how these cults of saints served as means of cultural preservation after the fall of the Roman state and the fall of the Roman civilization that followed. Due to the scarce number of literary sources in the 5th and 6th century, the material sources play a key role in understanding these changes and in making a deconstructive approach to outlining Western Balkan religious history of this period. This is why we have to start with questions in tracking these traditions. And these are the questions that I present here. What kind of sources do we possess and how to deconstruct them? How did the past reflected in these sources enter the cultural memory and came down to us? Why do we have periods of silence, and how did that affect our knowledge of the past we are referring to? On the presentation, you can see one of these material evidences that we uncovered in the 20th century. So I will try to illustrate a few examples on how this cultural memory about the Christianization was created, how it was preserved, and how it changed under the influence of modern scientific discoveries. For the sake of time management, I will exploit the examples of the cults of martyrs from the ancient Sirmium. The picture you see here is a modern-day presentation of 3 most important saints that you can see when you visit, for example, the Roman palace site in modern-day Sremska Mitrovica. So let's start with the present. What is in and behind a name? Modern-day Mitrovica owes its name to Demetrius, the Saint Demetrius you can see in the icon, but not of Sirmium, then of Thessaloniki, who was martyred on the 28th of October under the Emperor Maximianus. However, the tradition known as Passio Altera Sancti Demetri records this unusual part. And the prefect Leontius brought to Sirmium and deposited the chest with bloody clothes and part of its scarf and brought it to Sirmium, where he dedicated a church to him. We have the question, where did Sirmium come from in this famous hagiographical story? On the other hand, we have a Syriac breviary, which can be dated to the end of 4th century, mentioning only an Sirmio Demetrios on the 9th of April, no Thessaloniki. Then we have another late antique source, Hieronymian Martyrology, who also says in Sirmium, Deacon Demetrius and Donatus with some Fortunatus and 7 canonical virgins were martyred on the same date. Again, no Thessaloniki. Although Leontius from Passio is confirmed historical figure from the 1420s, and he built the church in Sirmium, first confirmation of such a structure we do not find before 1047, mentioned in John Kinemus, the writer of the 12th century, remark, obviously referring to the Passio Altera, and afterwards, in Hungarian sources, we see a mentioning of Benedictine monastery of St. Demetrius of Thessaloniki in a town called Civitas Sancti Demetri or Villa Sancti Demetri, or in Hungarian, Sava Saint Demeter, meaning the Saint Demetrius on the river Sava. And later, around the 14th century, we find even in Slavic Serbian monuments, the mentioning of people who lived around the saint's monument dedicated to Demetrius in the form you see here as Dimitrovci, in a reduced Slavic form where we have a cult and then...
I'm very sorry to interrupt. I don't know if it's the same for the people there, but for me, I've been seeing the slide number 10 since I entered. You mentioned us seeing things that aren't on it.
So I was referring to the name of Mitrovica and its relation to the cult of Saint Demetrius, and the posed question of whether it was Saint Demetrius of Thessaloniki or Sirmium. What we know is that Sirmium was destroyed in several invasions of various barbaric tribes, first by Huns in 440s, of which we know only Goths converted to Christianity already in the 4th century and settled temporarily in Sirmia region. After a Avaric invasion in the 580s, the Roman Sirmium was left to ruins. But did the Thessaloniki Martins show away the old Sirmian of the same name? We can say that there is an ongoing debate on this matter that has started in the 18th century with still no consensus. And I will sum up and present you just the evidence we have in their chronological order without naming the hypothesis. First, we have the mentioned Syrian breviary with the mentioning of Sirmium and Demetrius and his martyrdom on the 9th of April, 304. Then we have Hieronymian martyrology, where in Sirmium, Deacon Demetrius and Donatus with some Fortunatus and 7 canonical virgins were martyred. Then we have Intramuros Basilica in Sirmium, but it was discovered in the 20th century. Then we have the Passio Sancti Demetri, Miracula. Then we have Basilica in Thessaloniki. Then we have a monastery in Mitrovica, a medieval monastery mentioned in the sources. And then we have a present-day Orthodox church dedicated to Saint Demetrius in Mitrovica. So I'm moving to the next slide. The only clear connection comes from the Passio Altera. So you have the Passio Prima, which does not have this connection. And this tradition develops around the previous citation you could not see previously. He brought to Sirmium and deposited the chest with the blood-stained Saint Clemens and fragment of his Oraria in the temple of the holy martyr Demetrius, that he erected in the vicinity of the honored home of martyr Anastasia. Are there any material evidence of this? So look at the map I will present you, and this is from 2013. Before that, we could not make such a map because we lacked the archaeological evidence, and this map presents the Christian cult structures in Sirmium. And all these big buildings you see were excavated from 19th century onward, and they were all Christian in Christian use in 4th to 5th centuries. The oldest Thessaloniki basilica in honor of Saint Demetrius is dated to mid-5th century. Soon after, the center of the Illyrian prefecture was transferred from Sirmium to Thessaloniki, and that is in 442. And the city was supposed to be rebuilt to be worthy of imperial residence. Exactly these facts introduced the possibility of the first translation of the cult, especially as the similar destiny is confirmed with the Saint Anastasia mentioned in the Passio, as I will show further. The Intramuros Basilica, you can see it here. This is the one. Do you see when I click? Okay, thank you. The Intramuros Basilica in Sirmium is the only one in the city, as you can see here, conferring its importance, but no direct dedication was found. However, the topography mentioned in the Passio in connection to the Church of Anastasia and the archaeological evidence support this. So the closest building that we have, unfortunately ruined in the 19th century, but we have the maps and the sketches, how it looked like, is really very close to this church. Furthermore, in the 1970s, there was another inscription found in Mitrovica that will introduce an entirely new perspective to the subject. As proposed by Vladislav Popović, who was the leading archaeological investigator at the time, and later conferred by Ivana Popović and Snežana Ferjančić in 2013, the cult of Anastasia could have spread in the Gothic milieu, and that the Goths accepted the martyr as their patron and transferred her cult from Sirmium to Constantinople and also to Ravenna. I move to the next slide. So this is the inscription you see found in the 1970s mentioning the basilica of or potentially some sort of martyrium dedicated to the Blessed Virgin Anastasia. So what do we know about Anastasia, who's also mentioned as Anastasia of Rome, but very rarely Anastasia of Sirmium? We know that Hieronymian martyrology mentions her martyrdom on the 25th December, that her cult spread to Italy already in the 4th century, her Sirmian home, that is the church mentioned in the Passio Demetri. Then we have the first written record of her translatio mentioned in Theophanes' Chronicle in the 6th century, with an exact year, 458, to Constantinople. And that was the time when Ostrogoths, after the fall of Hunnic state in 454, made an arrangement with Emperor Marcian and settled in southern Pannonia and took over the defense of Roman frontier. They successfully protected Pannonia, and as a guarantee they would observe the agreement with the empire, they sent sons of their leaders to Constantinople And among them was Theodoric, who met in Constantinople with the military commander who was supposed to have been restored the church of Saint Anastasia there. Around 472, Ostrogoths leave Pannonia and go to Italy. These historical circumstances greatly favored the spreading of the cult of Saint Anastasia, first to Constantinople, where her relics had been transferred, probably to be protected from the barbarian invasions, or in this Gothic story, and then to Ravenna, the center of Theodoric state. Then, after these circumstances, we have appearing a long hagiographical cycle called Passio Chrysogoni et Socii, including different passions of Agape, Hiona, and Irene, Theodota, and finally Anastasia, who in this specific cycle again returns to Sirmium, although her place of martyrdom is somewhere completely else in the island of Palmaria in Italy. Then we have the mentioning of second translatio in the 9th century Zadar in Croatia, confirmed by an inscription on the sarcophagus of the Zadar bishop at the time, who brought the part of their relics, her relics, to Zadar. And then we have the 19th century discovered Christian buildings in Sirmium, and this inscription you see here in the 1970s. We have the third person you could see as the representative of Mitrovica's most reverend saints, the Saint Irenaeus of Sirmium, who was martyred on the 6th April of 304, mentioned both in Syriac Breviary and Hieronymianum. Then we have his own Passio, which was widely spread in Greek, Latin, and finally Slavic translations. Then we have the mentioning by Orchid Archiepiscopus Theophylactus in the 11th century. He mentions the miracles of Saint Irenaeus of Sirmium. Then we have the medieval name of Mačvanska Mitrovica, which is across Sirmium, across the river Sava, Villa Sancti Irenei, or in Hungarian Sant Terenje. Medieval churches in Mačvanska Mitrovica dedicated to Saint Irenaeus, and a martyrium and a church in Sirmium discovered in the 19th century excavations. So, how do we follow these paths of tradition? I summed up the following paths and the main questions to these paths. So we have the oldest written evidence dating from the 4th century, and they can be summed up to either inscriptions or either the lists, the calendar of martyrs dating to the time. Then we have our main narrative, our main written sources, the narratives. But the narratives are tricky here because the earliest manuscripts we have come from the 8th century, if we can date them, I would say more 9th century. But the text itself could be dated earlier. Material evidence we have from the 4th century, and then we have the problematic silence during the destruction of the Roman city in the 5th and the 6th century. And then we have the appearance of first translatio. Then we have new settlements bearing the names of the saints and acknowledging Christian tradition, starting from the 10th century. Then we have new narrative traditions, Greek, I mean here Byzantine Greek, or in Latin West, and then in Slavic you have the oldest Slavic translation of Saint Irenaeus Passio in the 10th century. And then we have from the 19th century the archaeological evidence that I presented, some of them which are important to this topic. So my conclusion is that the holy link I proposed in the title is that all the subsequent cultures adopted and adapted the cults dating from late antiquity. Whether they were Goths, Greeks, Romans, the Slav, distributed the tradition in their own way, and only way to decipher, deconstruct the origin of this tradition is with this interdisciplinary approach that changed a lot the views that we had at particular moments in history about this tradition. So thank you. This is the end of my presentation. I'm sorry for breaking the 20 minutes because of the problems with presentation, but this is the end, and I'm open to questions if you have them. I don't know when you are planning discussion or what, but this is it. Спасибо.